Hey everybody, it's Mark Bouchard with Police Mentors. This video is going to be about the book I Love a Cop by Dr. Ellen Kirschman. That's a fantastic book for anyone interested in law enforcement. So let's jump right into it. Some of the things she talks about, number one, is going to be the impacts of shift work. So what happens when our sleep gets disrupted and what happens when we work long hours. Both of those are problems that cops face, and we need to be aware of them and learn how to manage them. Second topic she talks about is cynicism. Here's a quote that she says, "A cynic expects nothing good from people and is therefore rarely disappointed. In an indirect way, cynical cops are trying to protect both themselves and the people they love." Cynicism is another huge thing in police culture because you get lied to all the time and you can end up being disappointed in your experience as a cop. So it's something we need to find a way to counterbalance, but the first step is understanding what's happening so that we can try to counterbalance it. The third thing that she talks about is hypervigilance. That is also crucial. As a police officer, you end up faced with a lot of danger. So you have a highly activated sympathetic nervous system. Think like your heart rate's up. Think of a poker player doing a big bluff, where you might just be sitting in a chair driving a wheel or turning a wheel and your heart is racing. We have to be aware of that hypervigilance. And even when we're not at work, we can still maintain it. The hard part at first is learning to turn it on, but the hard part as you go on is learning how to turn it off. It's learning that you could be at a restaurant and you don't need to always be scanning for threats, that you can actually just let yourself calm down and rest and recover. Number 4 is organizational stress. Here's another quote from the book. "Cops work in bureaucracies, and these bureaucracies create stress that far exceeds the stress they experience in the line of duty. Danger is not an everyday occurrence for most cops, but organizational stress and office politics are." That is a crucial point. That's actually why I dedicated a chapter in my book, Setting My Sights on Stigma, to organizational stress and moral injuries. It's something I didn't understand when I got hired, and it is really crucial because you do run into a system and a bureaucracy where you give everything you have and then you feel stabbed in the back at times, whether it's short staffing or lack of appropriate gear or an internal investigation when you've done nothing wrong and you're being investigated or maybe even charged for something when you've really done nothing wrong. It's really hard to manage when we feel let down by our organizations or unsupported. But if we have a framework to understand it, that can really help us. Point number 5, critical incident stress and trauma. First responders deal with so many more critical incidents than the general public. The general public might deal with a handful in their life, and a first responder cop might deal with hundreds. So the more we can learn effective ways to process them, the more that will help us. Here's a quote from the book she references, and I don't know, I'm assuming these names are changed, but the person's name in the book is named Lily. And she said, "I killed a woman and I don't even know her name." She goes on to say that her dreams were filled with nightmares and images of guns that failed to shoot. Now, I've had a few suicide by cop attempts where people tried to make me shoot them in my time in law enforcement. And I can say I struggled with a lot of nightmares from those experiences. And I didn't even actually end up shooting someone. They still deeply impacted me. So we need to learn how to handle those things. There are some other great books I'm going to make some videos on. You can check out my one about Lieutenant Colonel Dave Grossman on combat and on killing, which will help police officers learn how to process some of the thoughts and experiences around lethal force psychology. Number 6, cumulative stress. Dr. Kirschman writes, PTSD is a formally recognized mental disorder affecting about 15% of emergency service workers. This book is a little bit older. I think it's about 20 years old. And I think those stats are actually much higher. So there's some more recent research out of CIPSRT, CIPSRT, and their stats show more than 50% of first responders would suffer from one or more mental illness diagnosis. So the rates are actually quite high, but the good news is we can do something about it. If we learn healthy coping strategies, we can actually stay healthy. Okay, so within trauma, she talks about how trauma is in the eye of the beholder. And really what that means is that two people can go to the same call and person A is affected, but person B isn't. And yet those same two people could go to a different call and person B would be affected by it and person A isn't. It's not that one's better than the other or one's weaker than the other. It's just we all relate to things differently. Maybe I have kids and the one about kids really impacts me. Maybe someone else goes to a call involving a sex assault and they have a history with that and that impacts them, or for whatever reason. There doesn't need to be a reason. But it is important to understand that we all see things differently. She also says that having a trauma response is normal. Okay, if you look at another book like Viktor Frankl's Man's Search for Meaning, he says something like abnormal reactions to abnormal events are perfectly normal. If you go to some of the crazy things that we see in police work, sometimes it's going to hit you. And it does, it hit me. So it's totally normal and that's okay. She also says, she uses the term psychobiological, which basically means it's not just in your head. That is crucial to understand. There's another book, The Body Keeps the Score, where they really go into the science of what's happening. I can say I got a blood test when I ended up off work on stress leave, and my hormone markers were way off. My good hormones like testosterone and growth hormone were super low, and my stress hormones were super elevated. So just understanding, even though you can't see it in the mirror, there is actually things happening to your body. She also explains what we resist persists. And really, to put that simply, she basically says what we run away from, what we hide from, it still sits in there. It doesn't go away and it keeps impacting us. That's crucially important. I had to learn that the hard way. I spent about 10 years with a specific car crash that was really traumatic that I couldn't even think about it without breaking down crying. And once I learned how to actually express my feelings and I sought help for it, I can talk about it now. It doesn't bring me to tears. I've released a lot of that emotional pain, but I had to really learn the hard way. And then her last point on trauma is that coping styles count, which is so true. I've heard this from some other police psychologists, that if we can change how we think about mental health and we can change the coping strategies that we use, we can change our outcomes on things like PTSD. And we can stay healthy and stay in the profession. And that's what I'm trying to do. And that's what I'm trying to model for others. So here's a quote from her on that. They can recover and integrate the experience into their lives in a way that is manageable and may produce compassion and wisdom. Basically, post-traumatic growth. And I think that's true of my experience. That's how I feel about having experienced some trauma. And that's also what I've seen from many other people. So what did integrating the experience look like for me? For one thing, I saw a lot of death and a lot of sadness, but it's made me choose to take good out of it. So I phone my dad whenever I can. My dad's 77, and I make a point of calling him just to check in, say I love you, talk to him. And that's something I didn't really do as much before. I took for granted. But now I've got more realization that we're not promised a tomorrow, and neither are the people around us. And I do the same thing with my family, with my kids. I tell my kids I love them every day. I'm not guaranteed a tomorrow, and neither are they. And we need to make sure that we enjoy the most of the time that we have and our loved ones and let them know how we feel. And I don't think that I saw the world that way before seeing a lot of the sadness and the suffering that I've seen in my career. All right, alcohol and suicide. So she has a chapter on that. And again, super important topics of the alcohol abuse within policing, and then the size of the problem of suicide within first responder ranks, which is also described in some other research and some other books. So one of her quotes on that, most suicidal people are undecided about living or dying. And I think what she's describing in that is what I learned about my experience of passive suicidal ideation, where you haven't actually hit the point of making a plan and deciding, yes, I will kill myself, but you've reached the point where you're not really sure you want to live. And for me, that looked like constantly envisioning, enacting my own death. And really one of the things that was really bad for me was alcohol. I had a drinking problem at one point and I had to quit. I woke up one morning, it was like 9 a.m, and said, I need to quit drinking. And my next thought was, I can't. And then I said, well, can you go an hour? And I said, yes. And from there, an hour turned into a day, and a day turned into a week, turned into a month. And now I'm back to the point I can have a drink just fine. But I still don't drink much because it has been very good for me when I do. So the last point that she talks about, one of her other chapters, is about couples, which is another important topic. And I've seen a part of it because I also have a police spouse. It is challenging to have two people with these high stress jobs. And we've had times when we've both been on call. We've both had pointy end of the stick type positions. And you're running out the door, getting called out at 2 a.m. and no one ever gets to sleep. And then you're trying to manage kids too, which is actually something she says right in there, is that having kids makes that more challenging. But it also makes life so valuable. Like having kids is the most important thing I've ever done. So anyways, it is basically some of her advice would be to do things unrelated to police work. Can't just sit around and talk about policing. We need to have other hobbies, other interests. And even for your off-duty time, she recommends scheduling some things together as a family, some things together just as a couple or just with kids, and then some time by yourself. Having that healthy balance is really good for you. So let me know down in the comments what you think. Let me know what else you'd like to hear a video about. And thank you for watching.